It was supposed to be a short detour, just a hike through the woods to see something off the beaten path, something no one else had the guts to explore. That's what we told ourselves, anyway. The others were more excited about the thrill of discovering something hidden, something lost. Me? I was a little uneasy the moment we found the path leading to the village. Maybe it was the strange stillness in the air, or the way the trees seemed to part for us, as though they knew what was coming. But the others, John, Karen, and the rest, were already moving ahead, chatting and laughing as if they didn't feel the same tension creeping up my spine. The village was unlike anything I'd seen before. Nestled deep in the heart of the forest, it seemed untouched by time, as if the world outside had forgotten it even existed. The houses were small and made of wood, their exteriors warm but sturdy, with thick moss growing over the roofs like a protective layer. The people who lived there were odd, pale, with sharp features and eyes that never seemed to blink. They watched us as we entered, their stare so cold and unblinking it felt like they could see right through us, but they said nothing. They only nodded as we passed, their expressions unreadable. We didn't get much of a welcome. No warm smiles, no chatter. They were silent, busy with their own affairs, as though we were intruding on something sacred. But the village was small, maybe no more than 30 people, and we were, after all, just passing through. Or so I thought. It wasn't until we came across the altar that things began to feel wrong. The villagers seemed to avoid the area, giving it a wide berth as though it was something they feared, something they respected. At the center of the clearing, under an ancient oak tree, was a stone platform. On it rested a collection of silver coins arranged in a delicate pattern, each one glimmering faintly in the dappled sunlight. The coins were old, so old that the edges were worn smooth, and the symbols etched into them had long since been forgotten. Karen, ever the curious one, leaned in for a closer look. "What do you think this is?" she asked, a voice barely a whisper, as if not wanting to disturb whatever sacredness the altar held. John, the group's leader, shrugged. Probably some old tradition or a ritual. Nothing to worry about. But something about the coins, something about the way they caught the light made my stomach turn. I don't know why, but I had the distinct feeling that this wasn't just a relic of the past. It was still alive, waiting for something. But as the others moved around it, poking and prodding, I felt a strange compulsion. A pull. I reached down and before I could stop myself, I took one. Just one coin. It was heavier than I expected, cold to the touch, and for a split second, I thought I heard a faint whisper. I looked around, but no one was near. I slid the coin into my pocket, hoping no one had seen me. But as soon as I did, I felt a shiver run through me, like the world had shifted just a little. The air grew colder, the sunlight dimmed, and the village, once so still, seemed to hold its breath. "We should go," John said, his voice suddenly low. "This place feels wrong," but I didn't say anything. Instead, I followed the group as we started back down the path, the stolen coin burning a hole in my pocket. We didn't speak much as we left. Karen tried to joke about it, but her laugh sounded hollow, forced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for something to happen. As we reached the edge of the village, I turned back for one last glance. The villagers had gathered around the altar, staring at us with those piercing, unblinking eyes. They didn't say anything. They didn't move. But I knew, in that moment, that I had taken something from them. And whatever it was never meant for us. The forest felt different the next day. It was as though the world had been holding its breath overnight, and now it was exhaling slowly, quietly. The sun filtered through the trees in broken patches, and the air seemed thick, heavy with something unsaid. None of us mentioned it, but I could feel the tension hanging between us, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. John was the first to crack. He'd always been the calm one, the leader of our group, always quick to reassure us whenever we got spooked. But that morning, he was distant, his eyes darting nervously from one shadow to the next. His words were clipped, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that had us all on edge. "I don't like this place," he muttered as we packed up our things, ready to leave. "We should have gone yesterday. It feels wrong." The rest of us nodded in agreement, but I couldn't help feeling guilty. The coin, now buried deep in my bag, was a constant presence in my thoughts, a weight I couldn't shake. It had been heavy when I first took it, but now it felt heavier still, like it was growing, slowly pressing down on my chest with each passing minute. We made our way toward the edge of the village, walking quickly, our footsteps almost too loud in the thick silence. John was up ahead, his strides longer than usual. It wasn't until we reached the road leading out of the village that I realized he was no longer with us. "John," I called out, but my voice sounded small, swallowed up by the forest. There was no answer. We paused for a moment, turning to look back, but the village behind us seemed unervingly still. No sign of John. "I'll go look for him," I said, my voice trembling. I didn't want to be the one to search, but it was clear that someone had to. Karen, ever the voice of reason, shook her head. "We should stick together. It's not safe." But I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of dread that told me something had happened. Something bad. "I'll be back in a few minutes," I promised, turning back toward the woods. The others reluctantly agreed, and I set off alone, my footsteps faltering as I entered the trees. I didn't know where John had gone, but I followed the trail the best I could, calling his name every few steps. I finally found him near the edge of the forest, near a clearing I hadn't noticed before. His body was face down in the dirt, a few feet from a small stream. At first, I thought he was just lying there, resting, maybe passed out from exhaustion or shock. But then I saw it. The knife. It was buried deep in his back, the blade gleaming wet and dark in the afternoon light. His body had already stiffened, his face frozen in a grimace of pain, and worse, betrayal. His hand was still clutching the silver coin, the one I had taken from the altar. He'd been holding it as if it was his last connection to the world. Stepped closer, my heart racing, my breath shallow. There was no sign of struggle, no blood on the ground, just a look of finality on his face. But what haunted me the most wasn't the blood or the knife. It was the expression on John's face. He looked betrayed. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him, before I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. It was the rest of the group, following me at a distance. Karen was the first to speak. What the hell happened? I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't even comprehend what had happened. John, our leader, the one who always kept us safe, was dead. And the look on his face, it was as if he knew something we didn't. As if he knew that the coin, that simple silver coin, was the cause of all this. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." We didn't bury him. We couldn't. We didn't even speak of it as we moved quickly away, back toward the village. The air felt colder now, a heavy chill that made my skin crawl. And as we passed the altar again, I couldn't help but feel the eyes of the villagers on us, their silent stares piercing through the fog of fear that had settled in my chest. But this time, they didn't just watch. This time, they were waiting. The village had swallowed us whole. The air, the trees, the thick silence. They all felt like they were pressing in, closing around us. We tried to stay calm, tried to pretend like we weren't walking toward our own end. But I could feel the fear creeping into every one of us, tightening our nerves. John was dead, and none of us could explain it. The villagers didn't speak to us, didn't offer condolences, and yet it felt as if they were all silently accusing us. We buried John by the stream, as best we could. None of us said much while we worked, the weight of what had happened hanging over us like an invisible shroud. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just burying John. No, we were burying something else. Something darker. As we returned to the village, Karen took charge, her voice firm, but I could tell she was just as afraid as the rest of us. "We're leaving tomorrow," she insisted, trying to mask her own fear. "We've had enough. We need to get out before." But she stopped herself, her voice breaking. She didn't want to say it. Didn't want to admit that we might be in more danger than we realized. I didn't want to admit it either. None of us did. That night, we sat around the campfire, trying to eat, trying to stay normal, but nothing felt normal. The food tasted like ash in my mouth, and the fire seemed to flicker unnaturally in the darkness. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees, as if the forest itself was alive, listening to us, watching. Karen and I talked quietly, trying to make sense of it all. "It doesn't make sense," I said. "John, he was our leader. Why would someone kill him?" "I don't know," Karen said softly, staring into the fire. "But I feel like it's because of the coin. It has to be." I froze, her words hitting me like a punch. The coin, the one I had taken. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't said a word about it since we buried John. But now, hearing it from her lips, I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. She turned to me, her expression clouded with suspicion. "You took it, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to lie. "I did." She stared at me, her face pale, her mouth tightening. I could see the anger in her eyes, the hurt. "You know what you've done, right?" she whispered, voice shaking. "You've cursed us all." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but I couldn't. What had I done? We were trapped in this nightmare because of my greed, my desire to take something that didn't belong to us. But before I could say anything, a loud cough interrupted us. It was Mark, one of the others in the group, sitting just across the fire. He had a dark look in his eyes, too, and I could see the suspicion there, festering like a wound that refused to heal. "We need to stick together," he muttered, his voice rough. "We'll figure this out. But we need to stop blaming each other." Karen turned away, her face flushed with frustration, but she didn't respond. I couldn't blame her. There was no good answer to this, no way to make things better. We were all caught in something ancient, something powerful, and none of us knew how to escape. The hours dragged on, and the night grew colder. We couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig underfoot set our nerves on edge. We were all on high alert. There was no safe place in that village, no place that felt untouched by the curse that had been set in motion. But it was Karen who first began to show signs of something more serious. She complained of a headache, a dull, persistent pain that wouldn't go away. Her face grew pale, her lips dry. At first, we thought it was just exhaustion. After all, we had just buried a friend, and the stress of everything was starting to wear on us. But then, after she ate a small meal of stew, her condition worsened. Her stomach began to churn. Her skin became clammy. Her breathing came in shallow, strained gasps. We tried to help her, but nothing worked. Her body twisted in agony, her hands clutching at her chest as if the very air was choking her. "We need to get her help," I said, panic rising in my chest. But the villagers didn't seem to care. They were still silent, watching us from their windows, but no one moved to help. It was too late. By morning, Karen was gone. Her death was slow, painful, and silent. The poison, whatever it was, had worked its way through her body, ravaging it from the inside out. She died not with a scream, but with a look of horror in her eyes, as if she knew what was coming, as if she had already accepted it. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me before she died. Her eyes weren't full of anger or hatred. They were full of something much worse, betrayal. And then it hit me, the villagers. They didn't just know. They were part of it. The curse wasn't just from the coin. It was from them. The poison, the twisted deaths. They were part of the ritual. We weren't just trespassers in their village. We were sacrifices. I stared down at Corinne's lifeless body, and for the first time, I realized that we were never going to leave. We had walked into a trap, and there was no escaping the grip of what we had unleashed. The silence that followed Corinne's death was suffocating. It was as if the entire forest had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something. The air was thick, like it was absorbing her death, soaking it into the ground beneath our feet. No one spoke. No one moved. The villagers, who had once watched us with cold indifference, now seemed to blend into the background, just as silent as the graves we were walking toward. We buried Karen near the edge of the village, under a gnarled tree that had looked at us with its twisted branches like skeletal arms reaching out from the earth. The task was somber, but we didn't dare delay. Each of us seemed to be moving through the motions of survival, burying the dead, setting camp, eating what we could. None of it had any meaning anymore. We were no longer a group of hikers exploring the unknown. We were a collection of desperate souls, trapped in a place that none of us understood, cursed by something older than all of us combined. I knew it was my fault. I had taken the coin. I had stolen the very thing that had bound us to this place. But even now, in the face of all this horror, I couldn't fully comprehend what had been set in motion. I couldn't understand why the village had chosen us. Why had it been us, out of all the strangers passing through? Was it because of the coin, or was it something more sinister, something woven into the fabric of this cursed land? We had talked about leaving. We had talked about running far and never looking back. But that was before Corinne's body had been laid in the earth, before the villagers had gathered in the shadows to watch us. The truth was, we weren't leaving. Not anymore. It was the third day since Corinne's death when Mark, the last of our group who still seemed to hold on to some semblance of strength, pulled me aside. His eyes were hard, his face drawn tight with exhaustion, but there was something else there now. Something darker. I could see it in the way his hands trembled, in the way his jaw clenched when he spoke. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" he asked quietly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "We're all going to die here." His words hit me like a slap. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even bring myself to acknowledge the truth in his voice. The idea had been gnawing at me, eating away at the last of my hope. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. There was no escape. The villagers knew what we had done. They knew we had taken what didn't belong to us, and now they were collecting their payment. One by one, we would fall, and there would be nothing left but a story. A tale of stupid hikers who wandered too far into the woods and paid the price for their greed. I tried to go through the motions, sitting by the fire, cleaning the last of our gear, but my mind was elsewhere. I could hear the villagers whispering, their voices like the wind through the trees, too soft to make out the words, but sharp enough to cut through the air. And still, they said nothing to us. They watched. They waited. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I thought I heard something moving outside the camp. At first, I told myself it was the wind, or some wild animal stirring the leaves. But the sound was too deliberate, too quiet. It was as though someone, was walking around us, circling us, knowing we couldn't escape. I crept out of my tent, careful not to make a sound, and stood by the dying embers of the fire. The darkness around me seemed to press in, suffocating and thick. The shadows danced just beyond the light, bending in ways that didn't feel natural. And then I saw them. The villagers were gathered in a circle just outside the camp, their forms indistinct in the dark, but their eyes. Those eyes burned with a cold, otherworldly light. They weren't looking at us. No, they were looking at the ground, at something hidden in the earth beneath them. They were performing a ritual, chanting softly in a language I didn't understand. their words thick with the weight of an ancient power. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It felt like I was paralyzed by their gaze, trapped by something that was older than time itself. And then, one of them, an old woman, her face gnarled with age and something else raised her head. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something beyond just malice. There was something familiar in her gaze, something that made my stomach drop. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even a kind smile. It was something darker, something cruel. I staggered back into the camp, my breath ragged. I had seen something I shouldn't have, something that shouldn't exist. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deep in my bones. The villagers weren't just watching us. They were waiting for something, waiting for the final sacrifice. The next morning, I couldn't look at Mark. I couldn't look at anyone. The weight of our situation had become too much to bear. We were all being hunted, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. I thought about returning the coin. I thought about trying to undo the damage I had caused, but I knew it was too late for that. I had already signed our fate the moment I had taken it. Now, all we could do was wait for the villagers to finish their work. And I knew what that meant. One by one, they would come for us. And when it was over, the coin would return to its place on the altar, waiting for the next unwitting soul to make the same mistake. The days blended together, each one a reflection of the last. We were caught in a loop, a never-ending cycle of fear, guilt, and the growing certainty that we would never leave. There was no escape. The village, its cursed presence, and the villagers themselves. Everything seemed to trap us further. No matter how far we walked, we always ended up back at the same place, staring at the same faces. Silent, watching. Mark had become almost unrecognizable. The once confident, calm man I had traveled with now walked with a haunted, vacant stare. The last of his hope had died with Karen. He barely spoke anymore, his lips drawn in a grim line, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees, toward the villagers, and toward the ground as if expecting something to rise up from beneath our feet. I couldn't blame him. We were all broken, but it was Mark's unspoken fears that held the group in a vice-like grip. His paranoia had infected us all. At night, we huddled together, barely speaking, but I knew what each of us was thinking. If we didn't escape soon, we would be next. The villagers had already taken 2 of us, and there was no reason to believe they wouldn't come for the rest. And they didn't just want us gone. No, they wanted something much darker. Our suffering, our fear, our death. One evening, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, Mark snapped. It started with a murmur, too low for me to catch, but his words were growing more frantic as he looked around the camp. "They know," he hissed, his eyes wide. "They know. They've been watching us. It's not just the coin, it's everything. We're being watched. We're being judged." I could hear the tremble in his voice, the desperation. But before I could calm him, he stood, eyes wild, and backed away from us. "We need to leave now. There's no time. We'll all die if we stay here. We need to go. We need to get out before it's too late." I stepped forward to try and reason with him, but the way his hands were shaking, the way his breath was coming in short bursts, made me hesitate. "Mark, listen to me. We can't run. We're trapped. There's nowhere to go." "You don't get it," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "They're already here, in the trees, in the ground. It's them. It's always been them. And we're—" But he never finished. Before he could say another word, he stumbled backward, his feet catching on the ground as he crashed to the earth. I rushed to his side, but as I turned him over, I saw the knife. It was buried in his chest, just above the heart. Fresh blood stained his shirt, soaking into the dirt beneath him. His eyes were wide with shock, and in his final moments, he stared at me, wide-eyed, desperate, with a look of betrayal. Just like John, just like Karen. Didn't even have time to scream. Behind me, I could hear the shuffle of feet, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming closer. I spun around, my heart racing. They were there, surrounding us, silently emerging from the darkness of the trees. The villagers, and they were no longer just watching. They had come for us. I stumbled backward, my chest tight with panic. The knife. The cold, sharp steel gleamed in the moonlight. Mark's death was not an accident. It wasn't random. It was part of their plan. And I was next. My thoughts whirled, but there was no way out. There were too many of them. Too many for us to fight. They didn't even need to raise a weapon. They simply stood in a circle, closing in on me, their eyes fixed on mine. It was then that I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't about the coin. This wasn't about the few of us who had come into their village. This was something far worse. Something older. The villagers weren't just protecting their sacred coin. They were part of an ancient, endless cycle. A ritual, a harvest. And we, all of us, had been chosen to feed it. Could see the altar behind them, bathed in an eerie, sickly light. The same altar I had taken the coin from. The same altar that would now claim my life as payment for my foolishness. One of the villagers, an old man with skin as pale as bone, stepped forward. He was holding something in his hand, the silver coin. I staggered back, unable to speak, unable to stop the pounding of my heart. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of centuries. "You took what was never yours to take," he said, "and now you will return what you have stolen." He raised the coin high, and in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just the villagers who were bound to this place. It was the land itself, the very earth we walked on. The coin wasn't just an offering. It was a key, a link in an ancient chain that held the village in its grasp. A chain that had existed long before us, long before anyone could remember. And now, I was to pay the price. The villagers closed in around me. My heart beat harder, faster, as my legs began to give way beneath me. The cold of the forest wrapped around me, but I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. The coin. The altar. It all seemed like a dream now. No, a nightmare. Something out of reach, too distant to escape. I fell to my knees, my hands clutching the dirt, the realization hitting me too late. I had taken the coin. I had brought this down upon us. And now, with Mark's blood staining the ground, I would be the final sacrifice. I couldn't move. My legs were numb, my heart hammering against my ribcage, louder than the villagers' whispered chants. Their eyes were all on me now, those cold, emotionless eyes. It was as though the world had narrowed down to just them and me. There was no escape, no hope. It didn't matter how far I ran or how hard I tried to fight. I was trapped in a place where time and space didn't exist, caught in the web of something ancient, something far beyond me. The villagers were quiet, almost reverent, as they formed a circle around me, like wolves closing in on their prey. I felt like an animal, stripped of all humanity, my existence reduced to a mere moment in their ritual. The old man with the coin stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly as he raised the silver artifact high above his head, letting the moonlight catch its gleaming surface. "You have taken the heart of this village," he intoned in a voice so old, it seemed to crack and break under its own weight. "Now you shall return it or suffer the weight of its judgment." I couldn't breathe. The air around me seemed to thicken with every word, every breath, like the entire forest was closing in on me. I could feel the pressure in my chest, the crushing weight of everything I had done. My fingers twitched, but I couldn't move. It was as though some invisible force was holding me in place. The villagers' faces remained blank, impassive. Their eyes burned with something cold, something unyielding, as they stood like statues around me. They didn't need to speak. Their silence said it all. This was their world, their law, and I had violated it. I looked at the coin in the old man's hand. The very thing that had cursed us all. The thing that had started this nightmare. It was heavier now, I realized, just by looking at it. Not physically, but spiritually. A weight that pressed against my soul. And as I met the old man's gaze, I knew what I had to do. I had to return it. I had to put things right, even if I was too late. Even if the cost was more than I could bear. My hand shook as I reached into my pocket. The coin was still there, cold and solid against my palm. For a moment, I hesitated. It felt wrong to even touch it again, like doing so would condemn me to something worse than death. But I couldn't let it end this way. I couldn't let the others have died for nothing. I had to end this. Slowly, I stood. The villagers didn't stop me. They watched, silent, as I stumbled toward the altar, feeling the earth shift beneath my feet as if it was alive, shifting with my every step. The path seemed longer now, like the ground stretched to infinity, and the altar, once distant, was now so close I could feel the thrum of its power. I placed the coin gently on the altar. The air around me seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. For a moment, I thought the world might right itself. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the curse would lift, and I could go back to the way things were before we came here. But that wasn't how it worked. It never worked that way. The moment the coin touched the stone, everything changed. A low hum started to rise from the earth, vibrating through my bones, and the villagers stepped back, their eyes widening in a way that terrified me. The ground trembled, and the trees around us seemed to bend, their roots twisting and stretching like hands reaching out of the earth. The wind picked up, howling through the village, and the sky above darkened, thick with clouds that churned like the surface of an ocean. I stepped back from the altar, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the village seemed to distort before my eyes. The villagers, those lifeless, cold beings, began to move, their limbs jerking unnaturally as if they were puppets, and their eyes glowed with a feral, unnatural light. They were no longer human. They were part of this place, part of the curse. And in that moment, I realized what had been waiting for us, what the coin had really been, a key to something ancient, something evil that had never really been bound by time. The villagers were more than just guardians of a coin. They were the servants of something that fed on fear and blood, bound to the land in a way that could never be broken. I turned to run. There was nothing left to do. No reason to fight, no reason to stay. The curse had taken its toll. I could feel the weight of their eyes on my back, the whispers rising behind me like a torrent. But before I could get more than a few steps away, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the heart of the village. It was the old man, his grip like iron, his eyes burning with a maddening fire. He was smiling now, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who knew what was about to happen next. "You should have never taken it," he whispered, his voice a rasp, as the earth beneath us seemed to hum with anticipation. "Now you return it, but it's too late. You've already claimed your place here." I struggled, but his grip was unyielding, and his smile widened. The villagers gathered around me, their forms beginning to twist and stretch in ways that made my stomach churn. They weren't just people anymore. They were something ancient, something hungry. I looked at the altar again, and for the first time, I understood. The coin had never been the point. It was only the beginning. The altar wasn't for returning something lost. It was for binding the soul to the land forever. And then, before I could scream, they dragged me to the Judas tree. The same tree that had witnessed so many others' deaths. The same tree that had been waiting for this moment. I didn't fight them anymore. I couldn't. The villagers had made sure of that. As they strung the rope around my neck, I realized something. The coin, the altar, the villagers. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a cycle. One that had existed long before we arrived, and one that would continue long after we were gone. The coin was back, but its power had already claimed me. And when I died, I knew it would be waiting for someone else to make the same mistake. The noose tightened, and the world went black. I don't know how long I hung there, lifeless, suspended between earth and sky. The rope cut into my skin, a cold, familiar pain that blurred the edges of my consciousness. But the world didn't end. Not for me, at least. It continued. The wind still howled through the trees. The villagers still whispered their ancient chants in the background, and the cursed land beneath my feet pulsed with an insidious energy. I should have been dead. My body should have given in, the weight of my final breath dragging me into oblivion. But instead, something strange happened. Something I couldn't explain. I felt the earth beneath me, felt the roots of the Judas tree stirring, as if they had been waiting for me all along. They pressed against my body, cold and unyielding, their touch like the fingers of the dead crawling from the grave. It wasn't just the tree. It was everything. The land, the villagers, the coin. They'd all been waiting for this, waiting for the last piece to fall into place. And then, as my vision began to fade, I heard a voice. Soft, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. You are mine now. I could feel it. Something ancient. Something dark and unfathomable. It wasn't just the village that was cursed. It was the land itself, the very soil that held the roots of the Judas tree, the coin, and the villagers who had been bound to it for generations. They were all connected, all part of the same cycle, the same blood-soaked ritual. And now I was part of it too. The villagers were silent now. They didn't need to speak. Their job was done. The sacrifice had been made. The curse was complete. But even as the darkness began to claim me, something else stirred inside me. A sense of clarity. A cold, dreadful understanding. The coin, the altar, everything had been designed to bring us here, to this moment. The villagers hadn't just been protecting the coin. They had been feeding the land, keeping it alive with blood and fear, and I had unknowingly become the final offering. The last soul to be added to the cursed land. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, or perhaps an eternity. But when I came back to myself, when I finally opened my eyes, I was no longer the same. The rope was gone. The tree was gone. I was lying on the ground, my hands buried in the dirt, the earth cold against my skin. But I wasn't alone. The villagers were still there, standing over me, their eyes glowing with the same unholy fire as before. But now, something was different. They were no longer the silent, watchful figures they had once been. They were waiting for me. I could feel it, too. The pull, the connection. The curse was no longer just something I had witnessed. It was something I had become. I had been marked by the land, by the coin, by the altar, and now I was part of it. I could feel the ancient hunger beneath my skin, coursing through my veins, filling me with an insatiable need. A need to continue the cycle. I stood up slowly, my body unfamiliar, as if it no longer belonged to me. My legs felt like they were made of stone, stiff and heavy, and my hands trembled as I wiped the dirt from my face. I didn't know if I was alive or dead. All I knew was that I was no longer the same person who had wandered into this cursed village. I was something else now. Something darker. The old man, the one who had been the first to speak to me, stepped forward. His face was no longer the gnarled, withered visage I had seen before. It was younger now, his skin smooth and pale, his eyes still burning with that same unearthly light. "You are ours now," he said, his voice echoing in the silent air. "You are part of the land, part of the cycle." I didn't respond. I couldn't, but I felt it, the hunger, the need. And I realized what I had to do. The villagers moved aside, allowing me to pass. They didn't need to guide me, didn't need to speak. I knew what I had to do. It was the same as it had always been. The coin had never been the point. It was the blood. the sacrifice, the return. I walked toward the altar, feeling the pull of the land beneath me, the earth whispering my name. The villagers followed, silent and still, watching as I placed my hand on the stone. It was cold to the touch, but I didn't hesitate. The ritual was complete. The cycle would continue. The coin was still there. It had never left. And now, it was my turn to place it back. As I touched it, something shifted within me. The hunger, the need to feed, to take, to claim, surged through me. The altar, the coin, it wasn't just a part of the land. It was the land itself, its heart, its blood, and I had become part of it. I could feel the villagers watching me, waiting. They were no longer human, no longer just guardians. They were vessels of the curse, bound to the land, to the cycle. And now, I was one of them, one of the chosen. And as I placed the coin on the altar, I felt something stir beneath the earth, something ancient, something hungry. The cycle would continue, the land would be fed, and I would wait for the next soul to wander into our grasp, unaware of the price they would pay. I had become the Judas tree. I had become the coin, and I would wait